Question 5. Pre-Christian Europe was widely known to have harsh eugenics, whether it was imposed externally through the constant churn from wars or internally from selection practices. The advent of Christianity to Europe imposed a new social standard that gave more plight to underclass. It's also embedded load-bearing messages that institutionalized the sterilization of our warrior ethos. The criteria for who lives and who doesn't, along with who can breed and who will never breed, have been fundamentally altered by Christianity. The selection process has been changed from the historical norm, so we are technically moving away from our origins the longer we remain Abrahamized. My question is, can there be a legitimate case that Christianity is soft dysgenics at best?
Well, I think Christianity is mostly just malleable, and for most of history coexisted with a warrior class at helm, and dysgenics are a relatively recent phenomenon. Now, if you want to argue that such values were always there and couldn't be expressed before abundance resulting from Industrial Revolution, maybe there's some truth there. I don't know.
Martin, I'm sorry I was distracted. Can you let me? I don't think I understand the question. I don't. It certainly didn't sterilize the warrior ethos. That was World War I. It tried to produce an ethos that included the ancient world in Europe consisted of those people who were from the warrior castes, which was largely the property owning castes, and they were under the aristocratic tradition that treated the underclasses or conquered people as slaves, but was probably closer to useful domesticated animals. I'm sure in their minds that was the case, in the sense of their metaphysical premises. They did have rules for caring for these slaves, right? You weren't supposed to really abuse them or anything, but they did not treat them as equals. What Christianity did was gave these underclasses who were not strong, were not influential, were not from money, were not educated, did not have strong family networks. It allowed the weaker people in society to form a virtue system that was compatible with aristocracy, and somewhat of a competitor to it, so that it was possible for them to have self-image status and a membership in the community, which they were previously othered from. So Christianity solved a purpose that would normally have been and was being solved at the time through the gradual development of wealth, the increase, quite large increase in what we would consider the middle class, and the subsequent demand for labor and treating people as customers. The basic difference in the Western ethos over time is that because of our commercial orientation, we tend to treat people with indeterminacy, meaning that everybody's a potential customer in some way, whether it be friendship, commons production, potential marriage, or commerce. So in that sense, I just don't agree with this take here. I do agree with eugenics being practiced by essentially the caste system at the top, if not the bottom. And it was, of course, a harsh environment. And once we had the 10th or 11th century, our aggressive use of genetic pacification, all of these things, starvation, law, class segmentation, all of this led to maintained a pretty substantial eugenics program. My understanding of it, it's largely because of the upward redistribution of resources, in particular food, led to starvation at the bottom more so than the top. And so that by the time we are out of the into the early modern period, the increase in reproduction of the genetic middle class, not the economic, but the genetic middle class, which is the core, had pretty much had spread down to the lower classes simply because of land shortages. So I'm not really sure how to answer this question within its frame. The end question is, the selection process has been changed from the historical norm, so we are moving away from our origins the longer we remain Abrahamized. Probably yes. I think that the great filter problem was that the eugenics program was necessary, and that because of the Germans it got cut. This is a big mistake, because you can see in all the data that we're in genetic decline. In other words, we're in the process of reduction to the ancestral mean simply by the asymmetry of reproduction and the asymmetry of survival. I mean, modern medicine has all but ended the fact that, of child mortality. And so is that a good thing? Well, it's a good thing if you're a parent, but it's not a good thing depending upon your genes. You combine that with our saturation of the environment with all sorts of chemistry and molecules that are not really helpful to our neural maturity, and certainly appear to be doing some job on our cancers. I don't think that's a pretty good thing, but it's pretty obvious just in the decline of IQ that we're seeing. So, all right. So so when I go to it, I'm going to say Martin is. I said a lot of words reinforcing what Martin said, and I'd have to disagree with the framing that was put forth in the question.
I think the core framing for the question really is the last sentence. Is there a legitimate case that Christianity is soft dysgenics at best, i.e. it's not eugenic, right? There's no neutral. And
right. It's a compensation for an era where, 50% of your kids don't make it to age 8 or something, So I understand the need for, and shit, I forgot one of the main points, and I had it in my head. I got to hit this point, is that we forget that that the reason for feudalism at the end of after the Roman collapse, the reason for feudalism is because there weren't enough workers. And so you put them into serfdom because otherwise everybody'd starve. So when you're living in a world where there aren't enough workers and you have high child mortality, the church is just being practical. And then as the church evolved into the largest renter, landowner in Europe, or 50% of the land was held by the church. The church needed the revenue, etc., because tithes are just taxes, right? And so the church needed the revenue, and it needed the employees, the pays, right? So, I just I would say yes, the Christian ethic is a problem in some sense in this one, but only if it interferes with eugenics. And my understanding is the progressives, and they are progressives, an outgrowth of New England female women Christians, and the progressives were heavily focused on eugenics. It wasn't until the Nazis came along in the post-war Jewish terror and such a thing that this became an issue for us.
The way I think about this is maybe a lot more straightforward. To answer, the question at the end, which is, can there be a legitimate case that Christianity solves eugenics at best? As I look at it from a European history perspective, for most of the past 2,000 years, Europe has been, let's say 1500, right? European has been Christian.
Yep.
If Christianity is soft dysgenics, then we should see in those past 1500 years a gradual dysgenic decline. But instead, up until the cusp of the 1950s, what we've seen is actually eugenics.
Correct.
So I think that's a valid argument against this case.
I think it's like at the end of 19th century it starts going down.
Mhm.
With the industrialization and availability of food and pharmaceuticals, ironically, is far more dysgenic, has far more dysgenic effect than Christianity did.
Yep. Okay, what's next?
I wanted to add that I see treating others as customers as part of the problem, that it doesn't recognize the asymmetry of agency, which you at least recognize towards domestic animals.
I'd have to think about that, Martin, because the way I thought I was expressing it was that there was a greater likelihood you would engage in high trust behavior.
Of course, the idea I see treating others as fellow soldiers.
Yes, correct. But not everybody's a soldier. I agree with you. I mean, you're right. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that you can see the pattern worldwide that it takes the development of a middle class in order to be able to get yourself out of the low trust quality. I mean, what's her name is out there talking about this today. I actually kind of like her, a Russian historian. She said that Russia's still essentially a low trust polity, and they give each other good reason to be. But the real answer is that you only get a high trust polity after you've built a majority middle class.
But doesn't trust come before middle class?
It's an incremental process, right? I mean, the whole argument is you do what you said, which you start with the military. The military, in order to create order, imposes law, right? Law facilitates the commerce and the taxes that result from commerce to pay the military and the state, right? And so that's the state, that's the military, the state, the military, and the judicial objective is to produce an economy, and the more trust in the economy, meaning the more capacity to take risk over long and long time frames, with less and less certainty. That's just in the state and military's interest. I think what you are probably referring to is the tendency of that monetary financial sector to develop an interest that is contrary to the evolution of every other interest. In other words, the state, the military, the people, and the economy. My feeling is the problem is always and everywhere the bifurcation of the financial sector from the state, whereas I'm sort of in favor of limited bifurcation of the relationship between the state and any kind of faith or any kind of church as education. I'm not in favor of the treasury being, as ours is effectively privately held, because that just means that the people are financing the private sector, and that the financial sector, and the financial sector is an unaccountable governance.
Mhm.
So, that's something we've been arguing for forever. But I tend, when you talk about this commercial ethic, Martin, that's where I see the problem. And it could just be that I'm wrong, but I don't see the ethic of high trust exchange and cooperation being contrary to anything that you've sort of desired for. I see the financial sector and its essential greed, right, being the one that is disconnected from the feedback loop of what we would like, which is a monarchy's long-term attempt to persist the people. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's that you need the monarchy we need to get collapsed financial sector into service of the state. I think we might get what you're looking for out of that. Maybe not as disciplined as you'd like it, the way I think about it, but I think that's where I see the problem that I hear you talk about all the time. It's also where Brad sees it, by the way. I don't know if you know that. Brad agrees with you on most things.
I know.
What?
I know. I have been treating when you view someone as a customer, your responsibility towards him is quite limited only to that exchange.
I don't take it that way. Only if I think in Curt, I'm going to say something or you. I think a customer in your parlance means someone that you've established long-term relationship with, that you're going to do repeated business. Whereas a customer in Martin's, how Martin interpreted this, you do this deal with them once and you never see them again.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even if you do build a relationship, it's built around what's profitable for you.
Yeah, the problem is that leads to Jewish ethics of the bizarre. So the real issue is the spectrum of what you're calling commerce, marriage, and commons. And so when I'm talking about treating people as customers, I'm looking at all three markets. And I have studied quite a bit how hard it is to produce the village effect and to expand it beyond the village, and how hard that is, and how much law it requires to suppress all the advantages that come out from people that emerge as populations scale. So I can't imagine you want to live in a Middle Eastern bazaar economy. I can't imagine, but you would certainly like to live in a national socialist economy. So would I, for that matter. But you have to have a hierarchy of apparatuses to make that happen, and I don't think you can do that without high trust. And high trust appears to be something you produce by law on one hand and utility on the other. And it's the extension, like Christianity says, Christianity's principle is the extension of kinship love to non-kin. Well, that's essentially the same thing for in economics and politics, the extension of kinship love to non-kin. Well, I mean, it's not that you love another person, it's that you're not going to harm that person in a trade. You're going to seek reciprocity in that trade. So I disagree with the oversimplification, because it all it does is generate demand for authority, and lower the radius and volume of cooperation. So I think you have to look at it as a general behavior that people don't have to separate. We could make the same argument for the separation of faith and reality. You know, I'm a Christian in the sense that, you know, I talk to God every fucking day, right? But I'm not. But if you ask me about it, I'm going to give you the scientific answer, right? No matter what. And that's a duality that I'm able to preserve. Most people can't preserve that duality. And so the minute you restore a duality, like this is my family, right, and you're in a trade, and then I'm not responsible for the rest of society, then what you're doing is you're causing that person to have a single mode that isn't in favor of the polity, that's purely in favor of the family and self. And then you're down to Islam or Judaism. So I don't see it that way. As far as I can tell, it's not a choice. People need a precognitive habit that's a metaphysical premise. All right, and all civilizations develop that premise. And so my argument is that we're trying to and this is the weakness. I mean, you're right in this sense. The weakness of Western civilization is that we have so inculcated ourselves with Christian love beyond ourselves, with treating everyone as a customer, and treating all polity as an extended family. This is what's led to this fucked up universalism that you're always justifiably complaining about. It's because that's our metaphysical premise. My view is I'd like people to have that metaphysical premise in group and not out group, right? Except that it certainly leads to federations. So I view it as the law's job is to protect us against the metaphysical presumption that makes most of us treat everyone else as under the high trust ethic. Meanwhile, the law doesn't permit us to use that unwittingly against others outside.
Yeah, the way I think of it is this: it's Christianity ethics, you turn the other cheek, and so on. Its applicability has limits, and its limit, i.e., its boundaries within the boundary afforded by the protection of law. And what I mean by the protection of law is if the law can punish defectors, and that's where the boundary is. So, i.e., if Christianity extended to outside the limit of the law, i.e., the law cannot punish defectors, then that'll violate natural law and actually cause a decrease in trust rather than an increase in trust.
I mostly seek to recreate conditions in which trust emerges, and if you having to use law, then that suggests those conditions are already failing. Not that you shouldn't have the law, of course you should, but having the trust emerge on its own should be the priority.
I don't think trust can naturally emerge without the law in some form. And you can even say at the tribal, at the village level, right? Instead of calling it law, call it traditions and norms, which is proto version of the
Sure.
law. But in this person's dilemma game, you have to have some way of punishing defectors. Otherwise, how can trust evolve in that environment?
Yeah, I'm thinking about scale where reputation matters and the problems that emerge when you move away from
Are you sure you're not a libertarian?
does this libertarian.
You know, this is the trouble I always have. Like, the less sophisticated likes to put labels on everybody, whether libertarian or Spartan or whatever, this and or something else, or Nazi or whatnot. But it's far more nuanced. The reality is far more nuanced. I don't think there is a single variable name, for lack of better words, that describe each and every one of us.
No.
Or describe each and every one of our stance.